Our keynote today, on the sixth day of Ministration and Service, is a simple keynote. It is a most sublime keynote. However, it is also one that requires the utmost courage. It requires the utmost faith, and ultimately, it requires the utmost of the ruby ray fire of the condensation of God love. Love that is the utter givingness of all that one is. First and foremost, the givingness of that to your own individual I am presence. And recognizing that as you entrust all that you are, as you surrender all that you are, not to any outer thing whatsoever, but to your own God self, that flowing forth in the days, weeks, months, and years that lie before you, having placed that surrender, entrusted your free will to your God presence, and the giving of your all to your own I am presence, then your beloved mighty I am presence can and will polish all of those aspects of selfhood that you give to your presence, and in ways undreamt of by you, flow forth and direct your life according to the highest and best that your God presence is capable of. We begin then with an example of this from the life of beloved Jesus. A certain ruler asked him, saying, "Good master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "Why callest thou me good? For there is none good save God. Thou knowest all of the commandments. Do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, honor thy father and mother." And the ruler said, "All these things have I kept from my youth up." And when Jesus heard these words, he replied, "Yet thou lackest one thing. Sell all that thou hast, and give unto the poor, and thou shalt have treasures in heaven. And come and follow me." And when the rich young ruler heard this, he was very sorrowful, because he was very rich. And Jesus saw that he was sorrowful. Jesus said, "With what difficulty shall they that have great riches enter into the kingdom of God? For it is easier for a camel to go through the needle's eye than a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God." In this episode, there is depicted someone who was meticulous to follow the letter of the law. But unbeknownst to himself, was still attached to the outer world and what was here. And in this instance, Jesus, observing that attachment, realized that it would not enable that life stream to rise up and, quote, inherit eternal life, inherit the kingdom of God. Citing this example is not at all intended to imply that a life of abject poverty is part of the Ascended Master's formula for the Ascended Master way of life. Rather, the Ascended Master's formula is that as you pledge yourself to world service, and as you give yourself to your mighty I Am presence for the divine plan which your own I Am presence wishes to achieve here in this world of form, then the divine plan is that whatever you might require in the implementation of that divine plan, whatever you need, the precise term is as use, for the use of the implements, the wherewithal that you require in order to fulfill that divine plan, that you may and ought to lawfully invoke, so that you may distribute of the largesse of your God presence and enrichen and bless other parts of life with that largesse. What was really at the crux of this challenge on the part of beloved Jesus had to do with this very thing of giving of one's all to each one's own mighty I Am presence in a total surrender and lifelong commitment to whatever it is that the mighty I Am presence desires of your life stream. This is a central part of the personal path of initiation, the steep path to Christhood. It comes about as the outer self realizes, as Lady Master Nada has pointed out, as the outer self realizes that all that is entrusted into the stewardship of the outer self is not the personal property really of the outer self, but is entrusted to the outer identity by the God presence for use in accordance with the divine direction of the mighty I Am presence. The outer self comes into this world not even really owning its own skin. Moment by moment, the life the crystal cord energies that sustain life in the body are bequeathed to the outer self by the author of life, the authority for life, the individual mighty I Am presence. And so, not only is this true when it comes to individual path of initiation, the steep path to Christhood. But it is ever more true when it comes to the collective effort of the entire spirit of the Brotherhood of Light, operating as hierarchy, seeking to advance a new initiative onto the world scene. Recently, here in the United States, there was the pageantry and the spectacle of the welcoming of the head of the worldwide Catholic Church in the person of the Pope. Many stadiums were filled, many even governmental receptions took place, many ceremonies, and a great pageantry of the travels and celebrations of that person who now holds that office of head of the Catholic Church. In no other Christian denomination or other religious figure, really for that matter, do we find such prominence or deference afforded by even worldly leaders as is afforded to the head of the Catholic Church. This is in part due to the number of Catholics that there are around the world today. It's tempting to look at the outer present day appearance of that one individual and take it for granted without pulling back and looking at the whole history of a 2,000-year genealogy of the unbroken continuity of the same spiritual institution which has built upon its earliest infancy, its small foundation, but has succeeded in maintaining that which it achieved as one generation, handed off to the next generation, and built upon all that was sacrificed by each succeeding generation. For example, what would not be so heralded or acknowledged in what is there today would be the lifetimes of selfless service that have been entered into by millions of disciples over thousands of years. Not only the laity of those many generations, but also of those who from their youth onward renounced a worldly life and gave themselves, body and soul, to the advancement of their own spiritual path and in service of the instrument of the church in whatever ways they could. You may recall another hard saying that was part of the rule of the order of the Franciscans, the rule of the Cistercians, both of which were really promoted by our own beloved Kuthumi, world teacher. In more recent times, he himself having been a part of the circle of the disciples of Lord Gautama in the East prior to his Western incarnations, where there too, there were those holy orders that renounced worldly acclaim and pursued full lives of devotion to the pursuit of the path. So, in the orders of St. Francis, there were vows of poverty, vows of chastity, and dare we say, in the 21st century, vows of obedience. Poverty, chastity, and obedience. Not unique to only the Franciscans or the Cistercians by any means. In a few minutes, we'll talk about the counterparts to those in one sense as we understand them in our Ascended Master activity. But suffice it to say that it is only due to lives given fully to the cause of the Great Commission which Jesus gave to his disciples and to all generations that would follow, to take the good news of salvation to the world. It was only thanks to those who gave their lives without counting the cost that the faith was able to grow and flourish over the face of the earth. Certainly that may not have been unique to Christianity, but that one example serves as an object lesson for this time. Interestingly enough, for various reasons, the times have changed. The climate of the times have changed quite radically from what they were long ago. Undoubtedly, advances in technology, other kinds of preoccupations, advances in dubious advances in politics and other things have altered the way that the modern world views how past generations would conduct themselves. During the time, for example, here in America, when she was attacked at Pearl Harbor, that one event galvanized the entire nation. And without the need for a draft, there were millions of young men from farms and villages as well as cities who counted it a point of honor for themselves to give without counting the cost of their lives. And basically the entire nation rallied together as one, selflessly, to champion the ideal of America and to preserve her freedom for future generations. Some have written books about that time and called that the greatest generation. Knowing the history, even in the 20th century, of the earliest Ascended Master activities, the attitudes of the 1920s and 30s and even 40s was quite different from what it is today. The attitudes of the 50s were quite different. The attitudes of what was called the baby boom generation was quite different from what it is now. Anyone who is at all historian of the growth of ascended master activities, in particular those that preceded the Temple of the Presence, immediately preceded it, will have to acknowledge the fact that it was due to the selfless service of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young people in that baby boomer generation who came and gave their all to the cause, not counting the cost, not hedging their bets, but simply throwing themselves wholly and completely, and freely, one might add, into whatever service they could render, whatever decree work they could render, and viewed that really as a lifelong commitment. And it was thanks to that magnitude of that wellspring of service that those activities were able to be like Shiva, having many, many different avenues of advancement and service to their congregations and surveys and going out into the larger society on many avenues simultaneously, because there were those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hands and feet. Eventually, the laws of the land came knocking on the door and essentially said, you can't do that anymore the way you've been doing it. The politics of that, the economics of it, are subjects for another time. But that wasn't the only thing that, in a sense, changed. Not unique by any means, merely to the baby boomers who found the teachings of the ascended masters. It was systemic, even reaching the world of the Catholic Church. It is, there's some quite astonishing statistics that are very telling in this regard as it relates to the past many decades. For example, in 1965, the overall membership of the Catholic Church was roughly 46.3 million. And from 65 to 2014, the general membership of that one denomination, the Catholic Church in America, grew by 20 million members. While it was growing practically by a third, during that same time frame, those who were willing to take the vows of the priesthood, which of course meant poverty in the sense that you didn't build up, you didn't have a big wealth for yourself. It meant being unmarried. It meant entering into that hierarchical obedience to the bishops and archbishops of the church. So while the congregations are growing by a third, the priesthood declined from 58,000 to 38,000. The number of daughters of God who joined the nunneries declined from 179,000 to only roughly 50,000. a decrease of 130,000, while the whole membership of the church is growing. The religious orders of the brothers also declined roughly by half during that same period of time. That is really and mostly endemic to the changes in the overall tenor of one generation to another here in America, and probably to some extent far and wide around the world. The interesting thing to note about this is that while the membership in the Catholics was growing, the mainline Christian denominations, not the evangelical line so much of the megachurches, but the mainline Methodists and so forth, they were in decline. Their memberships were declining during that time frame. And while their congregations were getting smaller and their numbers were getting smaller, the number of Protestant ministers was growing, because in the Protestant denominations, there are no vows of poverty or chastity or obedience in that regard. So there was a livelihood to be had. There was a career to be pursued. And that symptomatic thing is something that everyone who comes into the fold of the Ascended Masters inherits certain degrees of that, and that explains somewhat why there is this chafing at the very ideas of the pharaohs of hierarchy. Those who stay abreast of some of these issues have pointed out that along these same lines that there was a previous decade, a previous generation of young people coming up who at one point laid claim to the tag or the nickname that they were the me generation, in the sense that their concern was for themselves and how they would advance their own personal well-being, and that following that generation of the me generation, there was a sense of there is now coming into vogue a sense of the entitled generation, that not only should one spend one's time worrying about and concerning oneself mainly with the responsibilities of one's own identity and the advancement of one's own identity, but that furthermore, like Jiminy Cricket, the world or my country owes me a living. That there is an entitlement consciousness now, that everything should be furnished free of charge to each generation as they come up. These things are a part of the social milieu in which the ship of state of our Ascended Master activity must navigate through these choppy seas. One observation on this that is sent forth to all who hope for this work to take the Brotherhood's cause of the Dawn and Golden Age to the masses, all should realize that in one sense, it is still the generation of the baby boomers, aging though they may be, who are yet carrying the primary workload for this activity, the temple of the presence. And while that may be all well and good for today and tomorrow, the time will come when that generation will take their leave and receive their well-deserved reward for the selfless lives, the selfless service that they have given and continue to give to the full extent of their capacity. And there needs to be far, far more wellspring of subsequent waves, of subsequent generations, beginning their vocations, their lifelong vocations in this work, and in their own way embracing these ideals, which are the very building blocks of what we know as world religions around the world today. It is, of course, much more than merely a religion. The Golden Age involves all areas of life, not just the pure spiritual dimension by any means. But nevertheless, the Brotherhood is sending forth that call, ringing that tone, that the summoning is to all of those of other generations to not allow the drumbeat of whatever is being taught on the college campuses necessarily, whatever is being Twittered or Instagrammed, whatever is part of the trends, the trendiness of the times, to drown out the still small voice of each one's own I am presence. For despite the froth of the times, all that is going on culturally, thanks to the technological advances and whatever might be the other ebb and flow of political pursuits, that despite all of that, there is the constancy of the shining light of the mighty I Am presence that must be the pharos, must be that beacon light that each individual torchbearer of the temple, each true seeker for inheriting eternal life in the ascension in the light, needs to understand that there must be a total commitment to the cause of the ascension, a total commitment to the work of the Brotherhood. No one is in any way being told that they must be a doormat to be walked upon. That is not a part of it. No one is saying that there's some obstacle course that is something that has to be run like a gauntlet in order for you to enter into some degree of suffering. What is really being said above all else, if we can go back to the teaching on service that was given by Lady Master Nada, we come back to that point because it is a very, very, all things flow from that divine ideal. The main essence of that point which she gave is that regardless of your worldly pursuits, including the desire to be of service to others, first and foremost, there must be the devotion to each one's own mighty I am presence. Not only attention to that presence, love sent to that presence, but something that is really the total givingness of all that you are given to your own I am presence, giving your very life to your presence. And in giving your very life, it means that all that you had thought your own, all of your worldly possessions and everything else are given up to your God presence. All of your sense of identity, all of the foibles, everything is given in a spirit of true divine love and surrender to your own beloved mighty I am presence. And then with the daily adoration to that presence and communion with that presence, what happens is that the return from the mighty I am presence comes and overshadows you, fills your heart, and there is a pressure of light and love from the God presence that gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that love becomes that sacrifice of the third secret ray, as that pressing forth within you becomes necessity. And you find yourself obliged, not by any outer bishop or archbishop or the senior brother or sister of the holy order, but compelled by that very God presence to enter into avenues of world service, to enter into a vocation. For all who have worldly careers or worldly obligations, all of those can be and should be offered up to your mighty I am presence, placed at the disposal of your I am presence. It doesn't mean you abscond from obligations that you have undertaken. It doesn't mean that you take out a begging bowl and quit your jobs, but it means that really and truly yourself, your health, your talents, all of those are offered up in service of that which the I am presence would have you do. Further than that, as you find yourself in great rapport and communion with one or more ascended masters, you, in the prayer closet of your own privacy, speak to that master or masters and offer up to them the gifts and graces of your lifetime, and invite those masters to orchestrate the circumstances of your life according to their wisdom and what they read as the authority and the divine direction of your own I am presence with which they are one. And out of that trust that they will chart a course for your life. And if you hold to that devotion in the fullness of time, miracles will be performed. Avenues of service that you had never even dreamt of will open up. And obstacles that you thought were unsurmountable will move out of the way. The Brotherhood has explained that when you enter into world service and the opportunity is there for great good to be accomplished with the multiplication of your personal talents and energies and your life lived day to day, that it opens up the opportunity for the masters to, where necessary, go to the lords of karma and obtain a dispensation that will balance or set aside certain worldly obligations or karmas that you thought were unbreakable, to resolve those dilemmas in a way that opens up the path for service. So when there is the opportunity for the greater multiplication of good, then that is something, a dispensation that can be granted. And I can promise you that when you find yourself on that divine plan which you have for your life, it will be the divine plan of your own mighty I Am presence, not merely the agenda of the outer human soul or ego. And when you are engaged in the work that your presence incarnated to achieve through you, that means that there is a sense of fulfillment in your life and a deep, albeit many times quiet, joy and happiness and sense of well-being that you are doing what you came here to do. When you are engaged in that service, it might have adversity associated with it. Admittedly, it's not likely to be a life of just mere leisure and recreation or the little homilies of just an idyllic personal life. So, but despite whatever might be those hardships, if you are doing what you came here to do, there will be that sense of fulfillment. Fortunately, the Brotherhood arranges for enough life streams on whose presence is intent on all of the 7 rays and the 5 secret rays, so that there are life streams who have that spontaneous motive of their heart to serve on the whole rounded spectrum of areas and avenues of service. This is the formula that will advance the cause of the dawning golden age. If you find such a path and such an action of total givingness to your presence to be daunting, to have about it a certain recklessness in your mind, or maybe fearfulness about whether or not things will turn out right, understand that in doing this, that's where the formula of the Christ virtues of the 5 secret rays come in. First, you see a job that isn't getting done and a desperate need in the world, and you say, I am the presence that will take responsibility for that job getting done. And you learn whatever skills you need to learn in order to enter into that service. You free yourself up to enter into that service. And then you are entrusted with the authority of your God presence and the mantle of that, whatever that role might be. It's turned over to you. So then you are the one who is responsible and therefore can execute that. That's the second secret ray of authority, and the flip side of the coin to authority, which is obedience. Obedience is the obverse of authority. The one who commands is the one who has first learned obedience. And that whole coin is the coin, both sides of that are really the second secret ray that relates so intimately to the quality of hierarchy. Then comes the demands of that service and the necessities to, Serapis Bey once said, to topple over a wall when you feel like you're very minuscule, like a scarab beetle. And that is what summons forth the full complement of the third secret ray, the nave of the wheel, that which is the axle or the central nexus of the whole wheel, is this third secret ray of sacrifice. Sacrifice is really and truly the mighty I am presence giving that which the individualized God presence is, which is namely its very own selfhood, which is the individuality of God good. This over and over and over again. Beloved Saint Germain, as Plato, as Proclus, and as the Ascended Master Saint Germain has extolled and praised the virtues of this God quality of the givingness of one's self. Once you understand that there is never any ability to deplete the source of the heart of the God presence, that it is itself the individual focus of the limitlessness of the goodness of the Godhead, and that as you draw on that ray of sacrifice, giving all that you are, that is when the presence brings attainment. That's when attainment comes to the outer self, and you give all that you are to the cause. And lo and behold, even though you've given all that you are, you're not depleted. You're not empty. Because as it flows, what happens is the doorway into the infinite is expanded. The doorway is unfolded, and there is pressing through always ever more than was before. It is a multiplication that takes place and just increases, not arithmetically, but exponentially. The capacity to be of service just increases, and hence there is this attainment that comes to pass. And what ultimately brings this about is in the need that you volunteer to fill is the crux of one half of necessities ray. The outer necessities of life, which appear to be beyond one's human abilities to ever satisfy. Those necessities, as a force of compression and condensation, if the student, the disciple, stays centered in their mighty I am presence, they will not quit the field of battle. They will not flee. They will not shirk their responsibilities, but rather draw upon the resources of love and selflessness, and they will discover that love always finds a way when courage and that selflessness stay the course. And so, lo and behold, love finds a way. And what might be the limited capacity of the outer self is augmented, supplemented, and multiplied both by the limitless nature of the individual I am presence and by the brotherhood standing close at hand, the hierarchy of light that sees the stalwart disciple, sees where this abundance is going to be consecrated and put to use, and the miracles are performed at that point. And of course, the object lesson is that this type of virtue of the I am presence, which the Christ virtues are really the counterintuitive, not human, self-centered, egotistical character traits, but they are the character traits of divinity. They're the virtues of the mighty I am presence. And the last of those is that the service of 1 hour or 1 day is not the end of the story. It's not a case of where, so long as your presence seeks to keep you in embodiment, you can say to life or say to your presence, I've served my enlistment. My enlistment is up, and now it's time for others to take my place. That is not the constancy that is the service of the brotherhood of light. Constancy then is that ability, and it is an expression of attainment to be able to stand constant and to continue to rhythmically render that service. Although to the outer mortal consciousness, a lifetime of service might have with it some kind of trappings of drudgery or sameness. It is only that when it is viewed from the standpoint of the human consciousness. The I am presence is in eternity. And in eternity, moments of eternity are changelessly immutable and continue for they have always been, they will always be. And the unspooling of the life of the presence that flows forth into the realms of creation, including this outer world, are expressions of that eternity that are the perpetuity or the constancy of service here below. One thing I may promise you is that steadfastness, which is constancy, will never become boredom. If anything, you will find in your service that no sooner have you mastered a particular ability to serve and you're ready to settle down and coast along because you can do it rather easily, then your presence will advance you to new lessons, new strivings to reach new levels of abilities that similarly, once again, you feel are just barely beyond your ability to achieve. But that is transcendence, that is initiation, that is the advancement of attainment. So constancy of service is by no means drudgery in that sense. And God willing, this spirit of mission, of service to, first and foremost, one's own mighty I am presence, then to the mighty I am presence and embodied heart flames of the children of God and the sons and daughters of God far and wide across the world. That spirit of entering into the ranks of world servers who are working in cooperation with the hierarchy of light is a spark that will find a way of being reignited in the youth of America and the youth far and wide across the face of the earth. Admittedly, it does mean that you are, in a sense, leaving behind the worldly lives, the ways of the outer world, and you are facing the sunlight of your own Godhead charioteer, and quite consciously making a determination that you are now, as they say in the East, you are entering the stream. You are on your final leg of your many incarnations, and you are consciously not on the maiden voyage into this world of form, but you are on your final voyage, permanently rising into the freedom of the victory of the ascension and your life in the ascended master octaves. In order to do, if you plan to do that, you have to, bit by bit, leave behind the ways of the world, leave behind a merely amalgamation with what the rest of the world is reveling in as the highest and best that life ever has to offer. So that really is a whole theme of ministration and service on the sixth ray. It is a very practical theme, and it is one that really and truly begins and ends with each one's own commitment to the I Am presence. The Ascended Masters know that as you truly and give everything that you are to your own I Am presence, not to Master Moria or Saint Germain, but to your own I Am presence, recognize that really it is all owned by your beloved mighty I Am presence, then we know and they know that everything will flow forth from your God presence in the fullness of time as it should. And a new golden age culture and a new golden age civilization and a new golden age I Am faith in the mighty I Am presence will flourish far and wide across the world. And the instrument, the vanguard of the Brotherhood's outreach into the world will be able to build upon itself from one generation to the next. If you find this path to be threateningly austere, you should not. Take your concerns to beloved Kuthumi. Take your concerns to Lord Maitreya and beloved Jesus. one thing that is, I'll just share with you a little humorous insight into the world of Kathumi's lifetimes in embodiment. He actually got a little too good at the poverty, chastity, and obedience thing for so very many embodiments that his presence decided that he needed to enter back into the abundant life, the abundant consciousness that there is in the Ascended Master octaves. And so his presence arranged for him to be born as Shah Jahan in India. And his life was not a life of poverty. It was a life of great abundance. It was not a life of chastity in that sense, because he had many wives as well as his most beloved wife. It was not a life of obedience because everyone else was obliged to be obedient to him. And it certainly was a chaste life in the sense that his interactions came from a pure, chaste mind, a pure and chaste love. And he was obliged to balance out that aspect of his own consciousness as well. Chastity is a purity of consciousness. And it is a sense that the life that God gives is sacred. The life that comes down the crystal cord is the body and the blood of the I Am Presence. It is precious. It is sacred. It has a consciousness of holiness of the I Am Presence. And it is not to be abused nor wasted for mere purposes of self pleasure or gratification. It is all to be consecrated for some permanent good. If that good be the furnishing of a body for another life stream to take incarnation, that is perfectly in order because it is constructive, it is creative, it is in its own way selfless because it is furnishing that opportunity. So that is, again, following this injunction of not having any waste in the universe. And it is certainly holding to the high consciousness of the purity of the mighty I Am Presence. As far as poverty is concerned, poverty in that sense, there's all levels of that. But the main thing is that whatever a person would be attached to in this life that would keep them earthbound once they leave the physical embodiment, that is a fetter. That is a chain of bondage. For some people, science is their lust. Their whole lifetime is spent burrowing into the physical earth element to the exclusion of all else. For others, maybe nature. They have become so enamored with nature and being in nature that they find themselves a place, they build themselves a log cabin, and the whole of their world revolves around this little patch of nature, so much so that they would want to haunt that place once they have died. That's attachment. For others, it can be all of the accoutrements of wealth or the abundant life. Francis Bacon said one time, I think it was in the Essays, that wealth is like manure. Its purpose is to be spread around. in order to produce fruit. That was his attitude about wealth. And he really left it all on the stage of life, and in that embodiment, as Francis Bacon, impoverished himself in the secret work that he was doing in many different ways. He used it all to that. He gave it all up, but what happened? Lo and behold, he comes back as Le Comte de Saint-Germain. He's got diamonds on the buckles on his shoes. And so on and so forth. So it goes. But there was no attachment. There was no grasping, aggrandizement to the person. It's for use. It's for divine purpose. That's what everything that is entrusted to you is for, what your God presence invested it for you. Your health belongs to your mighty I Am presence. Your longevity belongs to your mighty I Am presence. Whatever of the world's influence belongs to your mighty I Am presence. Your ability to testify to the truth of the teachings belongs to the mighty I Am presence. Your discretion over the supply of the world belongs to your mighty I Am presence. And so long as you are using it as your God presence wishes you to use it, without attachment and grasping or some sense of fear of loss or some record of the past of not having had enough, as long as those things aren't ruling, then if it is for use, that is why it's there, to be spread around and to advance the cause of the kingdom. Might just point out parenthetically that we are now engaged in Operation Pharos. And all of you, if you haven't yet, will shortly receive the packet of information of this agenda of what is going on. And you are all invited to survey that pyramid of sacrificial giving and know with absolute certainty that if we are to reach that goal, in order to accomplish the things that are outlined there within Operation Pharos, we need you to reach that level, the highest possible within your capacity over the next 3 years, to fulfill the highest possible level on that form of sacrificial, on that giving, pyramid of giving. For those of you who might be part of that baby boomer generation, who are in the next few decades going to plan to go with the Ascended Masters in the Ascended Master octaves, just remember the Temple of the Presence as a part of your will. What do you will with that abundance that you have, that you will certainly not be in need of once you are with the Ascended Masters? So that takes care of poverty. That takes care of chastity. Now we come to the horns of the dilemma, obedience. Oh, what a stickler that one is. One of the states in the early 13 states put on their flag a serpent, and the legend under it was, "Don't tread on me." And so there has been, since the various earliest days of our republic, there's been the idea that every person should be the captain of their own destiny. And that is by design, because it is true of every mighty I Am presence, that each one is captain of their own destiny. So that is really not so much at issue. I tell you where it really does become of issue. When there is a short-sighted misunderstanding of the truths of cosmic law, And where there is a blind spot in one's own life, what is a blind spot? It's karma. Sometimes karma blinds as well as binds. And when karma blinds, you're helpless. And even for yourself, you can't see necessarily what's going on. From time to time, the ascended masters might wish to strike those scales from off your eyes. But because of this misunderstanding of what's involved with this third quality of obedience, which enters into that whole idea of hierarchy, there is this rankle of the idea that no one should ever instruct someone else in those things. So many times those things have to be learned in different ways. And that is where what the master once called the Holy Catholic medicine of suffering comes into play, where the Christ presence sees that the outer self has a blind spot in their understanding of themselves or of reality. And they also understand that that outer self just won't be told or explained or illumined what to do. Sometimes the only avenue open to the Christ presence is to prescribe suffering of one sort or another. Because then going through that low road of suffering, the karma is expiated and the blind spot is ideally eradicated if that suffering is received in the right way. Today, we're supposed to use the violet flame and not need to go through those things. But if there is a warp where a person holds on to what's wrong, and that warp is going to mean that the violet flame cannot address that substance because the individual is holding on to it. And they're saying, this is right, this I want, doesn't matter about anything else. And so the violet flame will treat other things, but not the thing that is not surrendered. So this is where those who have entered into the hierarchical relationship through their service and through their trust in the ascended masters may from time to time merit the opportunity of an insight into something in their world. Still, it is not so much a matter of, it is never a question of servile obedience in that sense of the word. As has been pointed out and is once again reiterated, even the ascended masters do not tell you what to do. At every step of the way, you have chosen, with the overshadowing of your God presence, your own personal life plan. And when you arrive in the ascended state, you won't be handed an assignment that you are compelled to accomplish. There may be laid out for you a range of opportunities, but you will be obliged to choose. You as the ascended being. And every step of the way, there will be that free will choice. And that is true even now. The only area where that there is an overlapping is when it comes to the vanguard ascended master activity itself. Within the precincts of what goes on here as the teachings and as the practices, as the spiritual culture and tenor of our activity, that should remain with the ascended masters. We could hold a whole 3-month class as just a case study of the interaction between the brotherhood, the hierarchy, and one institution which is very well documented, namely the Theosophical Society. Master Morya, in one of the Mahatma letters, pointed out that they were given a 7-year probation as an organization to prove themselves. And at the end of that 7 years, the masters would reevaluate things and decide if it should be given an extension or if they would wait and start over at some undetermined future time. Here is one of the observations that were, here are the words of beloved Kuthumi, assessing what transpired with the Theosophical Society. Such are the reasons why Olcott still occasionally feels Morya's presence. He never senses mine own or hears from or of me, though his thought has wandered more than once to the scenes in the home which you were once familiar to the two of you. He wants to know why this has transpired. It is because the Theosophical Society itself has liberated itself from our grasp and influence. And we have let it go because we make no unwilling servitors. And that is the case. The members of the society, for all kinds of reasons, got too big for their hats, and they decided that they were going to control it. They were going to tell the masters what the masters should do, because after all, Morya and Kuthumi were illiterate highlanders from Tibet or the northern regions of India, whereas these were all upper class, well-educated, sophisticated people from England and America, and familiar with the ways of the world. And so they actually basically asserted that human willfulness and insisted that things go the way that they wanted. Part of which was that the masters themselves would no longer be visible part of the activity. They would just turn into a philosophical debating society. So, and Kuthumi says, the society itself has liberated itself from our grasp, and we have let it go because we make no unwilling servitors. Olcott claims to have saved the society by taking the reins of power. He has merely preserved for a while its body, but through fear, he has driven its soul out, and it is now basically a corpse, a machine running thus far well enough, but will fall to pieces once the driving force behind it is withdrawn. That is often the way that it is, and that's why this spirit of obedience to one's own mighty I Am presence and to the Ascended Master sponsors does need to be embraced. And that is so very important if the Ascended Master's activity is going to build this time on what it was before. Sad to say, but true, that if Saint Germain went and knocked on the doors of certain of the previous Ascended Master activities through the anointed representatives and said to them, to those who are in charge there today, here we are, we're ready to lead, they would be shown the door, and someone would sweep the threshold after they were gone. So those activities have, in a sense, for better or for worse, decided that they will run themselves. And what we want to do in the Temple of the Presence, through the Collegia Serapis, through the Hyksos of the temple, is continue to be open to obedience to our mighty I Am presence and obedience to the hierarchy, the pharaohs of hierarchy, to the brotherhood of light, so that all that has been, all of the blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifice of these generations are available to the same ascended masters, so that the masters can continue to launch future leaders of this activity onto the world scene, generation after generation after generation, to become more of a force and more of a voice on the world scene. That is why all three of those ideals of poverty, chastity, and obedience are part of the foundation of a golden age. Beloved mighty I Am presence, beloved Alpha and Omega, beloved Holy Kumaras, beloved Nameless One, beloved Lord Gautama, blaze forth the glorious outpouring of the 9 points of the secret love star, the cosmic white fire. Sustain it through all of those blessed heart flames of the children of God, the sons and daughters of God, and those who are the avowed torchbearers, vowed to the cause of the dawning golden age of Saint Germain and the Brotherhood of Light. Blaze that secret love star through them all. Lift them all into that spirit of high adventure and courage, launching into this world regardless of the age of the outer self, launching into these great feats of world service on the 6 rays of the purple and gold and the 7th ray of divine ritual, transmutation, and God freedom. We thank you and we accept it done, for we know that the light of God never fails, the light of God never fails, the light of God never fails, and the mighty I Am presence is that light. Amen.